My previous homily, the last time I was here 2 weeks ago, since I was gone last weekend, I introduced a new homily series in response to the National Eucharistic Revival. A series to help us walk through praying the Mass so that we can continue to grow our love and our appreciation for the Eucharist. And so last time we reflected that when we come to Mass, we're not just simply passive spectators, but we are to engage in full, active, and conscious participation. Something that we learn throughout our whole life to do more and more deeply. So I don't assume you don't know how to do that, but just like for myself, we can always learn to be reminded and do better in that area. The Church says to be able to do this, we have to be formed. We have to grow and be taught. And part of our formation is just simply coming here and experiencing the Mass week after week after week, letting the Lord change us, but also having a bit more focused teaching, which is what the intention of this homily series is all about. I also explained last week that since Mass is our participation in God's saving work, we're not the ones who decide how we do it. It's been given to us by Jesus and entrusted to his church. We don't come to Mass because it satisfies what we like or because we get entertained, but it's about being transformed to be more like Jesus. Hopefully through time, we actually do come to more and more enjoy being here at Mass and coming to love what it is that we do here, because that means the Lord has come into our hearts to transform us. So we're going to look today more closely at what this participation is like and how it can be used by Jesus to mold our hearts. So the first thing that the Church points out further to us about participation is that participation in the Mass is hierarchical. It's hierarchical. What does that mean? You've probably heard of the term Catholic hierarchy before. You probably think in your minds, well, the hierarchy, that's talking about the bishops and priests and deacons and the cardinals and the Pope. And that would be right. That's usually what we think of in terms of a hierarchy. But that term hierarchy, it simply means a sacred order, that things related to God are ordered a certain way. And indeed, that applies to those ministers. Right? They each have their own place within the church. We see it going all the way back in our first reading today. It already distinguishes amongst that sacred order. It talks about the apostles, who are the first bishops, as well as the presbyters, who are the priests. And it names those first deacons that become deacons within the church. This sacred order, this hierarchy of different ministers, is related to the different various roles that those individuals have within the governance of the church. And that's exactly the way the Mass works too. When we come to Mass, it's also hierarchical. It has a sacred order to it, meaning that different individuals take part in different roles, with different parts that you have. If you think about it, we're all one body, and the body has many parts. So the body of Christ, to function properly, especially here at Mass, each of us have our certain specific parts that we play. So, for example, there are certain prayers that I, as a priest, do and say, like, for example, the Lord be with you. Right? Those are my lines. But then there's other prayers that I don't say, but are yours, and with your spirit. There's certain actions that only the priest does. For example, holding the host and praying the words of consecration so that it may become Jesus' body and blood. I do that, but you don't, because you have a different role. For example, during that time, you are kneeling in adoration, giving honor and worship to the God who has now made himself present. There's other actions, prayers that belong, for example, to the deacon. So when the deacon is serving, he may proclaim the gospel. There's a sacred order to all of it. There's some prayers and actions that we all do together, things that we say and do as one. There's also certain members of the faithful that take on, at a particular Mass, certain specific roles. Various things like sacristans preparing for the Mass, or greeters or ushers assisting the people coming in, the servers helping us here at the altar, the lectors who proclaim the scriptures, choir, cantor, musicians, all helping lead people in the sung prayer, extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion assisting in the distribution of the Holy Communion. And when all these different various roles are done well, the hierarchy, this sacred order of Mass, really shines forth with a greater beauty. So, reflecting upon the fact that not all of us do exactly the same thing at Mass should help us also understand and prevent a kind of temptation that we might have to be jealous of a part that somebody else might have. I think this was a danger that some people had with regard to priests, and saying, well, why can't everybody just do what the priest does? Well, because there's a sacred order to things. And just because I've been called to do one part during the Mass, it doesn't mean that you can't participate, or that your participation is somehow less than mine. No. We need both of us. Both certainly important. It also should dispel the myth sometimes that people think is that, well, in order to really participate at Mass, you've got to actively be doing one of the ministries, like being a lector or an EMHC or music or servers, that if you're not doing that, then you must not be participating. And that's not true either. No. Even if you're not actively doing one of the ministries, assisting, you're still called to a very important participation in the Mass. And I suppose that it is possible that even somebody in those roles could fail in some ways to participate in the most important participation, which is interior. I'll come back to that here in a second. I'm not meant to pick on any of our ministers for our Mass today, but in theory we could think that, perhaps there's moments in which, say a server, maybe they aren't really paying attention or watching what they're supposed to do. Are they really participating in the way that they're called to as servers and helping serve at the altar? I've been at other parishes in the past, not here, but other parishes where ushers would get in the habit of just talking to each other almost through the whole Mass and reading the bulletin during the homily. Certainly not an example of the participation that their ministries are called to participate in. Could even be the case in which, an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, or even myself, we could become so distracted by our own thoughts that we just go through the motions of what we're doing and not really engage interiorly in what God is calling us to do at that moment. So that's why I want to focus on the participation that's meant to be going on interiorly, inside of us. And don't get me wrong, all the external things that we do are really important, and we should really strive to join in all those different things. Genuflecting, standing, sitting at the proper moments, kneeling, the different gestures we do, the sign of the cross before the gospel. All these various things, the responses, the prayers, joining in the singing, those are all really important. We should do those external things. But the external things are meant to express what's going on within our hearts and our minds. And I suppose that, if somebody absolutely refuses to participate in any of the external things, it could mean that maybe there's something missing in the internal as well. So what do I mean by this internal participation? Well, the Church says that our participation at Mass is primarily, or first, it needs to be internal. Participation begins with what's going on inside. What's going on within my mind and in my heart during Mass. Because prayer isn't just about external actions. It's about an interior conversation with God. It's about turning our hearts and minds to the Lord. So to summarize what interior participation is all about at Mass, we can just say this. that we are to offer ourselves with Jesus to God the Father. That's what we are primarily here to do. You come to give yourself to God, united with Jesus here at Mass. It's really a simple and beautiful thing that we do. We come to Mass to give ourselves to God. It's basically what it is. And so while the external participation is hierarchical, we do and say different things and according to our individual roles, the interior participation really is the same for all of us. This is what we're all being called to do. All are called to give ourselves to God. In the second reading that we have today, St. Peter reminds us that we're a chosen race, a royal priesthood. So in some sense, all of us share in the priesthood of Jesus. So if we think about what a priest is, in the Old Testament, they were the ones who offer the sacrifices. And that's exactly what Jesus does. He's the high priest because he offers himself. We just celebrated that at Easter time, right? He offers himself upon the cross. That is the greatest sacrifice that he offered to God the Father. And so as an ordained priest, that's also what I'm called to do. At Mass, we offer the same sacrifice that Jesus offered on the altar as he becomes present here in the Eucharist. And so, you also are priests to a certain degree. Now, you're not an ordained priest, right? You don't have the same role as I have. It's all according to the sacred order that we have at Mass. But you certainly do have something to offer. You come to offer yourself. You come to offer your family. All the things that are going on within your lives. You come to bring that to God, to give that to him, and allow him to give himself back to you. And that makes you share in the priesthood of Jesus. That's what St. Paul says in his letter to the Romans. He says, I urge you, brothers and sisters, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, your spiritual worship. So our spiritual worship, our interior worship at Mass, is to offer our whole lives to God. And at Mass, your offering is united to the offering that Jesus himself makes to the Father. In fact, that's my specific role as a priest, is to take all that you're bringing, all that you're offering, your whole lives, and unite it to Jesus, who becomes present on the altar, and then to offer that to God the Father. As we heard in our gospel today, Jesus speaks so much about his relationship with the Father, that he is the way and the truth of the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. So, someone may wonder, it feels like I don't really get much out of Mass. The question is, well, how much are you offering yourself? How much are we bringing and giving to God? Because in order for God to fill us with his life, we need to give him ours. We come to give our lives to him so that he can give our life to us, so that he can give his life to us. And that's meant to be our overall interior attitude when we come to Mass. And so, if hearing this, it doesn't sound familiar, hopefully some of you have heard this before. It can just be a reminder, but I know for myself, I didn't really think too much about this until I went to the seminary and found out that's what I'm supposed to be doing interiorly. I'm supposed to be giving myself to God whenever I come here to Mass. And when I discovered that that's what I was supposed to do, it really changed the entire way that I participated in Mass, knowing that that's what I'm supposed to really be doing. So we're called, as I've said already, to full, active, and conscious participation. On the outside and the externals, we all have our specific roles and things that we say and do. But interiorly in our hearts, we're all to be turning ourselves to God, giving ourselves to him, offering ourselves with Jesus to the Father. So as I continue the series, walking through the Mass, I'll be showing how this interior participation of offering ourselves to God kind of works with the various external things that we do through the course of the Mass.